Look, I'm not a big fan of WAR. For example, it's not very accurate. There are multiple versions for it, and it kind of just represents everything that I dislike about player analysis. Having one number to tell you who the best player is, or even assuming that there is an actual numerical best player, is not something I agree with. However, I like the ability to sift through many seasons and careers, as well as getting an idea of whose stats think the best players are. Ultimately, Fangraphs does not have a leaderboard for the best seasons of all time. So, Baseball Reference it is. Who do you think the best season of all time is? 04 Bonds, maybe a Ruth season, maybe one of the Mays seasons. Remember, WAR takes into account base running and defense. Maybe the Bullet Rogan season. In 1921, he pitched 200 innings, as well as having 300 plate appearances. If you guessed Old Hoss Radbourn 1884, you are so close. He was second place, behind Tim Keefe in 1883. Who is Tim Keefe? I have no idea. Hall of Famer Tim Keefe played from 1880 to 1893. In 1883, he had a 2.41 ERA through 619 innings. Both of these numbers are below Radbourn's 1884, with Radbourn's ERA being a considerably lower 1.38. Now, in all fairness, Keefe had 100 less plate appearances and a higher OPS, so that could very well be where the extra WAR is coming from for Keefe, except no. Keefe had more pitching WAR than Radbourn in his season. Now, this isn't a video about how terrible WAR is, and I think even the people who use it acknowledge that it isn't very precise. The difference between these two seasons is less than one win, which is within the margin of error for WAR. But come on, just look at these numbers and tell me which season is better. Okay, so I wrote this rant forgetting about one very important thing. Above replacement. They played in different leagues in a different year. So Keefe played in the much better league, which is why he was awarded with the higher WAR. Now, I've gone on this tangent about which season is better, and that may have distracted you from something that should have definitely caught your attention. 600 innings pitched. Forget which season is better. Both of these guys threw twice as many innings as the most someone has thrown in the last 40 years. 13 players have pitched 600 innings in the history of the game, and they're all before 1890. What do you expect? Of course they're all before 1890. But if we're going back to the WAR leaderboard, the first hitting season is Babe Ruth's 1923 at 15th. What about the players ahead of him? They're all pitchers from 1913 or earlier. And if we take out Walter Johnson, who you've actually heard of before, no one after 1889. Funny, that's the same as the innings pitched leaderboard. One thing that WAR takes into account that I think a lot of people kind of forget about is volume. It's very important. And to put it simply, back when pitchers threw the whole game and started 50 plus games a year, they were much more valuable than hitters. 7 of these 14 pitchers threw 600 innings or more. Apart from 2 Walter Johnson seasons with 300 innings pitched, the rest all threw at least 500 innings. In 1923, Babe Ruth had 699 plate appearances and 409 chances in the field, aka he impacted play 1,108 times. In 1884, Old Hoss Radbourn had 678.2 innings pitched and 387 plate appearances. Add 63 chances in the field, not including pitching to that, and he impacted play a whopping total of 3,127 times. This is why the top WAR seasons of all time are all pitchers. When you impact the game 3 times as much as everyone else, you have a much better chance of having the best season of all time. This year, Shohei Ohtani made waves because of his ability to hit and pitch, which gave him 1,172 chances, which is 200 more than the next best this year in Zach Wheeler. And that is still basically a third of Radbourn in 1884. This era of pitching will quite literally never happen again. And I think it should be celebrated for that. Back in this time, pitchers were expected to finish games. They didn't have nearly the amount of information that they do now. And not finishing a game was seen as a sign of weakness. You didn't want to be seen as weak. So, go out there, throw 300 pitches if you have to. Have you guys heard of that story of that pitcher who died during a game and still finished it? Sorry, I'm getting off topic. Obviously, baseball players were willing to tax their body more, but it should also be noted that the speed of pitches being thrown were much slower. As some of you may know, Walter Johnson threw around 90 miles per hour in his prime, which was almost 2 decades after these seasons, and that was just about the fastest anyone could get up to. Pitching was both much more taxing back then and much more lax. Also, throwing overhand wasn't even permitted until 1884. 4 of these seasons took place before the pitcher was allowed to throw overhand. The curveball was invented in 1881. 2 of these seasons took place before the curveball was a thing. Originally, a walk took 9 balls, then 8, then 6, then finally 4. Only one of these seasons took place when a walk was 4 balls. Up until 1887, batters got to request where the pitcher threw the ball. 9 of these seasons took place during that rule. One could look at this, see that the sport had only been played professionally for about a decade around this time, and say that this would be impossible to happen in modern-day baseball. But at the same time, isn't that kind of the point? Baseball was kind of a massive mess back in those days. It would literally be impossible to do anything that these guys did in the sport as it is today. And I think that's kind of what fascinates me. These numbers quite literally look impossible to us, but they were almost common back in the day. The fact that we don't have basically any video and very little account of these seasons adds to the interest. We have some of the greatest seasons of all time, and we have very little aside from the numbers on a baseball reference page. You may already know some about Old Hoss Radbourn's 1884, but I think it's the most impressive season here, so I want to point out a few things from it. First, the reason it ever even happened in the first place was because the Grays' only other pitcher was Charlie Sweeney. He got drunk one day and quit the team when his coach tried to pull him out of the game. Because of that, Radbourn started 40 of the Grays' remaining 43 games. He won 36 of them, by the way. He literally couldn't raise his arm high enough to comb his own hair in the mornings. His Grays played against the best team from the other league, American Association, in a 3-game exhibition. Old Hoss Radbourn pitched every inning of all these 3 games, gave up no earned runs, and as you may have guessed, won all 3. Old Hoss Radbourn had single-handedly won the first World Series. That is the best season of all time, in my opinion. But you may have already known all that information. It's time to learn as much as we can about seasons lost to history. Now, I say as much as we can. I didn't want to go that far for this video because these seasons are so incredible. The numbers they put up are so ridiculous that at least some account of stories or just details about the season should be pretty easily available for us to find, that we shouldn't have to go scouring the internet just to find them. First up is Tim Keefe in 1883. He was a very deceptive pitcher, and many at the time thought he may just be the best pitcher in baseball. No more graceful, skillful, and strategic pitcher ever tossed a ball over the plate to the bewilderment and dismay of opposing batsmen, to quote a newspaper from the time. On July 4th, he pitched 2 complete games in a row. First was a 1-hit shutout, and the second was a 2-hit win. And that's kind of it. I was hoping for a lot of stories, and again, I could probably find more information if I was looking harder. But considering this is arguably the greatest season of all time, the fact that there aren't well-remembered stories is pretty strange. Hud Galvin is responsible for the 3rd best season in MLB history. Who? I have no clue. In 1884, he had 636 innings pitched and a 1.99 ERA. He threw a no-hitter, the second of his career on August 4th. Even in an era where two-man rotations were commonplace, Galvin was a workhorse. His hands were too small to throw a curveball, so apart from the occasional off-speed, he mainly dominated with well-located fastballs. He threw a perfect game before the term even existed. Pud was a relaxed, calm, lighthearted player. He earned the nickname Gentle James for this, and that's kinda it. Again, one of the greatest seasons of all time, with no videos for us, not really any stories, just an extremely limited pool of information. The earliest season on this list is Jim Delvin's 1876. He only pitched 3 years, but he played the outfield for 5, and this was his second pitching season. He threw 622 innings with a 1.56. He also hit .315 with a 115 OPS. Funny enough, he only had a 687 OPS on the year. That was 15% above average at the time. He had 299 plate appearances, so that above average offense will definitely contribute to his WAR. He may have been the first MLB pitcher to ever throw a slider. At the time, it was called a drop pitch. There are several interesting tidbits about Mr. Delvin. He was the only player in MLB history to start all of his team's games in a season. In 1877, he was also responsible for baseball's first ever scandal. But as far as stories from his 1876 season, none to be found. Look, I can't stress this enough. There are definitely ways for me to get a hold of some stories about these seasons, but they're either behind paywalls or I don't know that they exist. And for stories about seasons historic like these, I don't think they should be that difficult to find. Guy Hecker is the third player on this list who put up their incredible season in 1884. He threw 670 innings pitched with a 1.80 ERA. He also had a 148 OPS plus with 328 plate appearances for a 2.5 offensive WAR. He won 50 games as a pitcher, which is the third most of all time, but the second most in that season. He also had an outing where he struck out the first 7 hitters he faced. He is the only pitcher to hit 3 home runs in a game or get 6 hits in a 9-inning game. He also set the whip record at 0.77 until Pedro Martinez broke it in 2000. Guy Hecker may be the most interesting player on this list so far, with his two-way ability, and yet, information on him is still incredibly limited. His Wikipedia page is literally this long. Next up is Walter Johnson, both in 1913 and 13th on the list in 1912. I'm assuming you already know a fair bit about Johnson, and he is not really the focus of this video. He played in the 20th century and only threw 300 innings in his best seasons, which is not like the rest of the pitchers on this list. Also, there's actual footage of his pitching. His sidearm delivery with at least the second fastest fastball in the league is obviously crucial to his success. If you bring up the best pitchers of all time with anyone who knows their stuff, Walter Johnson will be in the conversation. Up next is Charlie Buffington, who I've literally never heard of before. And he's also the 4th player who put up his season in 1884. He had an above-average season at the plate, along with a 2.15 ERA in 587 innings pitched. He threw a 17 strikeout game as well as won 13 straight. He was a thinker with a ridiculous 12-6 curveball and a sinker. He started his playing days as a catcher until a foul tip off the eye took him out and he looked for another position. And as far as interesting information about him goes, that's about it. John Clarkston, 1889, 2.7 ERA, 620 innings pitched, 16 WAR. This was post moving the mound back, overhand throwing, and a walk being 4 balls. In 1889, he became the first pitcher to throw an immaculate inning, one of the most rare feats in MLB history. As you may have guessed, no other stories about this year, and in fact, that's what the rest of the list is going to look like. Very light descriptions of these players' careers, no special stories kept from these historically great seasons. So, if these seasons are so incredible, how come we have such little knowledge of them? I doubt many of you have even heard of any of the players on this list aside of Walter Johnson. And typically, seasons like these have stories that we remember. Bonds vs. Gagne, Ruth's called shot, the catch. These are iconic moments. How come we don't remember anything from these seasons? I think the simple answer is time. These seasons were in the infancy of the league, and before any video of the game existed. Before people cared as much as we do now. But is that the real reason? I guess we'll never know. I don't know. Do you know? I don't think so. But this is still a very interesting time in MLB history. The rules were still being figured out. Should the batter be allowed to suggest where the pitcher should throw the ball? I don't know. You decide. 90 miles per hour was unheard of, and two-man rotations were commonplace. I just think it's a lot of fun to look at these seasons and stare at the numbers, because we will quite literally never see them ever again.